Hello and welcome. Tonight, we are traveling to the edge of the world, into the vast white silence of the Arctic. We are going to explore the profound philosophy and hidden life lessons within Guillermo del Toro's vision of Frankenstein. This is not a story of horror, but a deep meditation on loneliness, the need for connection, and the power of forgiveness. As you drift off, we will unravel the wisdom buried in this tragedy, looking past the fear to find the humanity underneath. On this channel, we take long, quiet journeys into the lessons that cinema can teach us about life. If you find value in these peaceful explorations, please consider subscribing to join us for the next story. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the snow begin to fall. Picture the Arctic, that vast white silence stretching beyond what the eye can hold, where ice holds ships like cupped hands, and the only sound is the wind's long exhale across frozen water. In Guillermo del Toro's vision of Frankenstein, this desolate beauty becomes the frame for everything that follows, a confession spoken into cold air, a story that arrives not with fanfare but with the soft creak of a ship going nowhere. Captain Anderson and his crew find themselves trapped, their vessel locked within the ice as though nature itself has decided to pause time. The men wait, and in their waiting, they learn what silence can teach. When noise ends, truly ends, something unexpected happens. The mind becomes audible at last. Thoughts that were drowned by daily labor and conversation suddenly rise to the surface, demanding attention. The Arctic offers no distraction, no escape from the questions we carry within us. Perhaps that is its gift, wrapped in frost and discomfort. Into this frozen stillness comes a stranger. Victor Frankenstein appears at the edge of survival, frostbitten and barely breathing, dragged from the ice like something the sea decided to return. He carries no cargo except memory, no possessions except a story that weighs more than any physical burden. The crew takes him in, warming his body while his mind remains lost in darker places. Anderson watches, listens, and slowly begins to understand that this half-dead man brings something more dangerous than illness aboard his ship. There exists a particular kind of arrival that changes everything it touches. Victor does not come seeking rescue in any simple sense. His survival feels almost accidental, a byproduct of forces larger than his own intentions. The ice that trapped Anderson's ship also delivered this messenger, this wounded prophet of creation and consequence. And so the frame of the story establishes itself not through action, but through patience, through the accumulated weight of waiting for something to reveal itself. Survival in those frozen reaches belongs not to the strongest or the cleverest, but to those who can endure, who can make peace with stillness when movement becomes impossible. Victor arrives, having learned this lesson through suffering rather than wisdom. His presence aboard the ship suggests that sometimes we are saved despite ourselves, pulled from destruction by strangers who owe us nothing. The question drifts like breath in cold air, visible for a moment before dissolving. Can a confession warm frozen water? Can words spoken into the silence of the world's edge change anything at all? These are the questions Del Toro invites us to hold as Victor's eyes finally open, as his cracked lips begin to form sounds that will become the story we are about to hear. Imagine a grand house, the kind that looks beautiful from the outside, with tall windows and carefully tended gardens. Yet inside holds a chill that no fireplace can warm. This is where Victor Frankenstein spent his earliest years, under the roof of Baron Leopold, a father whose love expressed itself through expectation rather than embrace. The camera lingers on these formal rooms, on furniture arranged with precision, on silence that fills the spaces between necessary words. Childhood in such a place becomes a kind of training, though not the sort anyone would choose. Baron Leopold believed in discipline above all else. Affection, in his understanding, weakened character and produced soft men incapable of achievement. So he withheld warmth the way a gardener withholds water, believing that deprivation would force deeper roots. Young Victor learned his lessons well, though perhaps not the ones his father intended. The boy discovered that approval must be earned through accomplishment, that love was not a gift freely given, but a reward for excellence. This belief would shape everything that followed, bending his life toward a single desperate question. What must I achieve to finally be enough? When tenderness is treated like weakness, children adapt. They build themselves around the absence, forming identities that seek validation through ever greater accomplishments. Victor became brilliant not despite his father's coldness, but in response to it. Every book mastered, every concept understood, every teacher impressed represented another attempt to unlock a door that remained firmly closed. The tragedy is that such doors often have no key at all, that some parents simply cannot give what they never learned to offer. The past programs the future in ways we rarely recognize while living through it. Victor did not consciously decide to become obsessed with conquering death, with forcing nature to yield its deepest secrets. That obsession grew from soil prepared long before, from a childhood where achievement was the only language of worth. A boy who learns that love must be earned will become a man who believes the same about everything else, including respect, including safety, including the right to exist at all. The hunger never truly ends because it was never truly fed. Consider how homes can starve their inhabitants while appearing abundant. Servants brought meals, tutors provided education, physicians attended to illness, yet something essential remained missing from those grand rooms. Victor learned precision but not comfort. He learned to analyze but not to trust. These absences would echo through decades, shaping his relationships, his ambitions, and ultimately his terrible creation. The film allows us to see this early architecture of damage, to understand that monsters are made long before they draw breath. The wounds we carry often began before we had words for them, before we understood that other families operated differently. Victor's story asks us to look gently at our own hungers, to wonder what doors we still knock upon hoping someone will finally answer. There's a particular ache that belongs to those who lost a mother young, a warmth remembered but no longer accessible, like standing outside a house at night and seeing light through windows you cannot enter. In this telling of the Frankenstein story, something unusual happens with casting that deepens this wound into something almost unbearable. Mia Goth portrays not only a living character, but also the brother's late mother, appearing in memory sequences that blur the boundaries between past and present, between the dead and those who refuse to let them go. Victor's mother exists now only in fragments. A particular way, light fell across a room, the sound of a voice reading aloud on winter evenings, hands that offered comfort without condition, without expectation, without the cold arithmetic of his father's approval. When she died, something in the household died with her, some possibility of softness that might have balanced the barren severity. The boys were left with absence shaped exactly like love, a space that nothing else could fill, no matter how desperately they tried. Grief can become fuel, and fuel can burn the wrong house entirely. This is what happens when loss remains unprocessed, when mourning never completes its necessary work. Victor did not simply miss his mother. He froze her in memory, transformed her into an ideal so perfect that no living woman could compete. The warmth she represented became something to pursue rather than something to accept, a destination always receding beyond the horizon. His longing looked like love from the outside, but longing and love are not the same thing. One reaches forward, the other rests in the present moment. When real connection feels too risky, too likely to end in abandonment, the mind retreats to what cannot leave because it already left. Victor's remembered mother asked nothing of him, disappointed him never, remained eternally gentle in ways that actual relationships cannot sustain. This perfection was the problem. By enshrining her in unchanging memory, he made living women into pale comparisons, made present warmth seem inferior to past warmth, simply because the past cannot argue or age or die again. The frame lingers on these memories with tenderness, showing us the mother not as she necessarily was, but as she lives within Victor's longing. Firelight flickers across her features, soft and golden, while everything in his current world seems harsh by comparison. The visual language tells us what dialogue cannot quite express, that this man remains a boy in certain essential ways, still searching for arms that closed around him decades ago, still listening for a voice that fell silent before he was ready. The way we sometimes love what is gone more easily than what remains, the way memory edits out imperfection and leaves us chasing ghosts dressed in golden light. Victor's tragedy began here, in the refusal to let the dead rest, in the belief that enough achievement might somehow rebuild what time had taken. Into a life shaped by cold discipline and frozen grief comes a figure offering something Victor has hungered for since childhood: recognition. Heinrich Harlander appears as a man of wealth and refinement, someone who sees in young Victor not merely talent, but destiny. The Patron speaks of greatness, of potential waiting to be unleashed, of discoveries that will reshape human understanding. These words fall upon ears desperate to hear exactly such things. And so a partnership begins that will accelerate everything toward catastrophe. Flattery operates differently on those trained to feel unworthy. Where a secure person might receive compliments with simple pleasure, Victor absorbs them like drought-cracked earth absorbs rain. Harlander's encouragement feels like rescue, like finally being seen after years of performing for an audience that refused to applaud. The young scientist does not stop to wonder why this wealthy stranger takes such interest in his work, does not pause to examine what might be wanted in return. When you have been starving long enough, you do not inspect the meal placed before you. Money arrives, and with it, everything Victor needs to pursue ideas that respectable institutions would never fund. Laboratory equipment of unprecedented sophistication, access to materials that proper universities would question, time freed from ordinary obligations, space cleared of ordinary concerns. Harlander removes every obstacle except the most important one, the internal voice that might have asked whether some roads should remain untraveled. Boundaries soften when resources seem unlimited, ethics become inconvenient details, footnotes to be addressed after the breakthrough arrives. Consider the nature of patronage throughout history, how it has elevated genuine genius and also enabled genuine horror. The relationship between money and creation is never simple. Funds given without conditions still carry expectations. Support offered freely still creates obligation. Harlander may speak of pure scientific advancement, but patronage is always, at some level, a form of control. The one who pays shapes what gets built, even when appearing to ask nothing at all. Victor mistakes generosity for freedom, not recognizing that the leash simply grew longer rather than disappearing. The story shifts here from pain toward power, and power tests character in ways that suffering alone cannot. Victor possessed the wounds necessary to drive him toward forbidden knowledge, but wounds alone do not build laboratories. Harlander provides the resources that transform private obsession into active pursuit. Together, though perhaps not as equals, they begin constructing the conditions for something unprecedented. The question of who benefits most from this arrangement remains deliberately unclear, shrouded in polite conversation and expensive gifts. How often do we accept help without fully understanding what the helper wants? How frequently does encouragement serve the encourager's purposes more than our own? Victor could not see these questions because he needed too badly for them not to exist. The young man who longed for his father's approval found a substitute willing to provide what Leopold never could. That this substitute had his own designs seemed in the moment entirely beside the point. Not all children respond to coldness in the same way. While Victor turned inward, building cathedrals of ambition in the hollow spaces left by absent warmth, his brother William chose a different path entirely. The younger Frankenstein grew into adulthood with something Victor never quite managed to acquire, the capacity for simple happiness. William laughs easily, loves openly, moves through the world as though it might actually welcome him. Watching the two brothers together reveals how differently the same household can shape those who share it. William becomes a kind of mirror, reflecting back to Victor everything the elder brother sacrificed in pursuit of greatness. Where Victor works through the night, William sleeps soundly. Where Victor postpones joy until after some future achievement, William finds pleasure in ordinary afternoons. The younger brother does not dismiss ambition, but neither does he worship it. His contentment requires no grand accomplishment, no revolutionary discovery, no applause from strangers. This difference between them is not hatred, but something perhaps more painful, incompatibility so deep, it prevents real understanding. The film presents William without mockery, without suggesting his simpler satisfactions represent failure. There exists genuine wisdom in choosing peace over achievement, in recognizing that restless striving often produces restless lives. Victor cannot see this wisdom because seeing it would require questioning everything he built his identity upon. To acknowledge that William might be happier, might even be healthier, would unravel the entire architecture of justification Victor constructed around his obsessive work. So instead, the elder brother dismisses what he cannot allow himself to admire. Perhaps tonight, as thoughts grow softer and slower, you might consider the Williams in your own life. Those people who seem to have found something you keep searching for, who appear content with what would never be enough for you. It is easy to judge them as unambitious, as settling, as lacking vision. It is harder to wonder whether they discovered something you missed, whether their apparent simplicity conceals a sophistication of a different kind. Victor makes the easier choice. and that choice cost him the relationship that might have saved him. The distance between the brothers widens as years pass, measured not in miles, but in mutual incomprehension. William tries to reach across, offering invitations to dinners, to celebrations, to the ordinary rituals that bind families together. Victor declines more often than he accepts, always too busy, always on the verge of something too important to interrupt. The tragedy builds quietly in these refused invitations, in conversations that never happen, in the slow erosion of connection between two men who once shared a nursery. What does it cost to believe that peace is weakness? Victor pays this price without recognizing the transaction, trading brotherhood for solitude, trading potential comfort for guaranteed isolation. William represents the life Victor might have lived, the road not taken, the version of himself that chose differently when standing at the same crossroads. That this alternative exists, breathing and laughing and loving nearby, makes Victor's choice both starker and sadder. In most tellings of this story, Elizabeth belongs to Victor from the beginning, a childhood sweetheart promised to the brilliant scientist, waiting faithfully while he pursues his dark work. This version reshapes that geometry into something far more uncomfortable. Elizabeth is engaged to William, not Victor, and this single change transforms everything it touches. The woman who represents warmth, morality, and steadiness has chosen the brother who can actually receive what she offers, leaving Victor on the outside of a happiness he perhaps wanted but could never have maintained. Elizabeth moves through the Frankenstein household like a gentle flame, illuminating the dysfunction around her simply by being healthy within it. She loves William genuinely, sees his goodness clearly, and builds a life with him that Victor observes from a distance. The elder brother's feelings toward her remain complicated, tangled between admiration and something darker. He watches her with William, watches their easy affection, and something twists inside him that he would never name as jealousy. Instead, he transforms it into principle, into philosophy, into reasons why their simple happiness represents something lesser than his grand pursuits. Love becomes dangerous when it transforms into possession, when it stops being about the beloved's well-being and becomes about the lover's needs alone. Victor wishes Elizabeth happiness with himself, or perhaps he simply wishes to have what his brother has, to prove that he too can be chosen, can be preferred, can be loved without having to earn it through achievement. The distinction matters less than the outcome, a man wanting something he has no right to want, resenting its absence without examining why it was never offered. The triangle operates silently through family gatherings and holiday meals, through glances that last slightly too long, through conversations that carry weight beneath their ordinary words. Elizabeth likely senses Victor's attention but does not encourage it. Her loyalty to William remains unwavering, her moral clarity unclouded by whatever flattery Victor's interest might represent. She becomes in this way a measure of health against which Victor's sickness can be seen more clearly. A reminder that some people manage to love without complication, without agenda, without the desperate grasping that characterizes everything Victor touches. What does it cost to be the steady flame in a house full of troubled men? Elizabeth carries this burden without complaint, offering warmth to those capable of receiving it while maintaining appropriate distance from those who would consume her entirely if given the chance. The film allows her dignity and agency, making her neither victim nor prize, but a person with her own judgments, her own choices, her own reasons for loving William. Instead of his more accomplished brother, the stage arranges itself for collision. Victor's unspoken feelings, William's innocent happiness, Elizabeth's clear-eyed devotion. These elements circle one another like weather systems that must eventually meet. The story prepares a moment where affection and violence will occupy the same space, where the tensions building silently will finally demand expression. Every institution has its guardians, those figures who stand at the gates of knowledge and decide what may pass through. Professor Krempe occupies this role at the university where Victor pursues his studies, a man of established reputation and careful boundaries. He represents everything Victor has learned to resent: caution, tradition, the slow accumulation of verified facts rather than the wild leap toward transformation. Their conflict becomes a quiet war between two visions of what science should be and what it should never attempt. Krempe looks at Victor and sees dangerous brilliance, the kind that builds bridges without checking if the other side can bear the weight. The professor's skepticism is not born from jealousy or small-mindedness. though Victor interprets it as both. Rather, it emerges from decades of watching ambitious students mistake recklessness for courage, mistake boundaries for cowardice. Krempe has seen what happens when brilliance operates without wisdom, when the question of capability drowns out the question of consequence. His warnings carry the weight of experience. Though experience rarely convinces those who have not yet earned their own, the word no lands differently depending on who hears it. For someone secure in their worth, criticism becomes information, useful data about how to improve or where to reconsider. For Victor, raised to believe that approval must be earned through ever greater achievement, Krempe's resistance sounds like judgment, like the old dismissing the new simply because the new threatens established comfort. He hears "you should not" and translates it into "you cannot," and that translation transforms reasonable caution into personal challenge. The professor means to protect. The student feels only obstruction. Knowledge without humility becomes an argument with reality itself. Victor accumulates facts, masters techniques, and impresses other faculty members. Yet Krempe's reservations remain unmoved by these accomplishments. The older man understands something Victor has not yet learned, that capability creates obligation, that power demands proportional responsibility, that the ability to do something terrifying imposes a duty to ask whether it should be done at all. These are lessons that cannot be taught through lecture, only through consequence. Victor will have to learn them the harder way. The laboratory begins as an idea during these university years, a private space where institutional skepticism cannot reach. Victor dreams of walls that hold no professors, no committees, no voices urging patience or restraint. He dreams of freedom that is actually isolation, independence that is actually escape from accountability. Krempe watches his student withdraw into private study, into texts the university would not sanction, into questions the scientific community agreed decades ago to leave unanswered. The professor's concern deepens, but concern without authority can only watch and wait. Where exactly lies the border between curiosity and hubris? Victor crosses it without noticing, so focused on the destination that the territory beneath his feet blurs into irrelevance. Krempe saw the crossing and tried to call him back. That the call went unheeded does not diminish its importance or its accuracy. The laboratory Victor constructs is not merely a workspace, but a temple. Rising in a tower that surveys the surrounding landscape, the circular chamber holds equipment arranged with almost ceremonial precision. Copper and glass catch available light, transforming it into something that seems almost sacred. Notebooks line the walls like scripture, filled with observations and calculations that only their author can fully interpret. Here, alone, Victor finally escapes every voice that urged caution, every institution that demanded patience, every relationship that required him to be something other than purely driven. When work becomes religion, dissent begins to feel like blasphemy. Victor tolerates no questioning within these walls because questioning would disrupt the faith that sustains him. Each experiment confirms his direction, each small success validates larger ambitions, and the accumulating momentum makes stopping feel impossible. The tower becomes both sanctuary and prison, a place where Victor is most fully himself and also most completely lost. He cannot see the contradiction because seeing it would require stepping outside the very frame that gives his life meaning. The body, in Victor's emerging understanding, reduces to mechanism. Organs become components, systems become processes, and the soul itself becomes hypothesis rather than certainty. This reduction is necessary for the work he intends. To create life, he must first believe that life is merely arrangement, that the difference between dead matter and living flesh is ultimately a problem of engineering rather than mystery. The tower's equipment supports this belief. Its precision instruments measuring what can be measured, its silence dismissing what cannot be quantified. Night after night, the work continues. Victor eats when he remembers, sleeps when exhaustion demands, speaks to no one about what occupies his thoughts. The tower's isolation, once chosen, becomes compulsory. He could not explain his progress to Krempe, could not justify his methods to William, could not describe his goals to Elizabeth without seeing horror in their eyes. So he stops trying to communicate at all, lets the relationships that might have anchored him drift into neglect. Human voices are replaced by the hum of equipment, human warmth by the glow of carefully tended flames. What do we sacrifice when we refuse to be ordinary? Victor gives up everything that ordinary life provides, companionship, rest, the pleasure of moments that produce nothing but themselves. His tower rises above the common world precisely because he believes the common world has nothing left to teach him. The height represents not just physical elevation, but spiritual separation, a deliberate removal from humanity in pursuit of something he considers higher. That this pursuit will ultimately return him to humanity in the most violent way possible remains, for now, invisible. The mind narrows toward a single impossible desire, to create life where none existed before. Everything else fades to background noise, barely noticed, certainly not valued. Victor has built himself a world of one purpose, and that world has no room for anything his purpose does not require. The night arrives when theory becomes reality. Storm clouds gather above the tower as though the sky itself has been waiting for this moment, charged with energy that Victor learned to summon and direct. Equipment stands ready, connections checked and rechecked, the assembled form lying still upon its platform. Years of study, months of preparation, countless ethical boundaries crossed without hesitation. Everything converges toward a single instant when lightning will either prove Victor right or reduce his work to scorched failure. The bolt descends with violence that shakes the tower's foundations. Electricity courses through carefully designed channels, flooding the still form with power beyond anything natural birth provides. Victor watches, barely breathing, as instruments record readings that exceed every prediction. The air itself seems to change, charged with possibility and consequence in equal measure. And then, movement, a twitch of fingers, a shuddering breath, eyelids struggling open for the first time. The impossible has occurred within these circular walls, witnessed only by the man who made it happen. Triumph floods through Victor in those initial seconds. The pure exhilaration of accomplishment that validated everything he sacrificed to reach this moment. He did what no one believed possible, what institutions forbade, what nature itself seemed to prohibit. The proof lies before him, breathing, moving, existing, because he willed it into existence. This is the apex of his life, the moment toward which childhood wounds and adult obsessions equally pointed. He stands as creator, as conqueror of death itself, as something perhaps more than merely human. The feeling does not last. As the creature's eyes focus, as awareness replaces mere animation, Victor begins to truly see what he has made. The form is not beautiful, not the perfected humanity he imagined during years of planning. Scars map the assembled flesh. Proportions that seemed correct in death appear wrong in life, and something in those newly opened eyes reflects back a question Victor cannot answer. The triumph curdles into something else, something that tastes like the beginning of horror. Can is not the same as should, even when the can succeeds beyond all expectation. Victor proved capability without establishing wisdom, demonstrated power without considering responsibility. The creature breathes because Victor wanted to prove he could make it breathe, not because Victor considered what that breathing would mean for the breather. Creation without consent is still creation, but it carries a debt the creator rarely anticipates. A door opens in that lightning-struck moment, and it will not close politely regardless of how desperately Victor might later wish it would. The maker stands before what he has made, and for the first time the question of what is owed begins to take shape. It will grow larger in the hours and years ahead, this question. It will demand answers Victor does not possess, and payment Victor cannot afford. But for now, there's only the storm's aftermath, the smell of ozone, and two beings staring at each other across a distance neither fully comprehends. Imagine waking without any preparation for existence. No gradual development in a mother's warmth, no slow accumulation of sensory experience, no gentle introduction to light and sound and touch. The creature opens his eyes, and the world floods in all at once, overwhelming, unfiltered, impossible to organize into meaning. Pain arrives before understanding, confusion before language, fear before any framework that might contain it. Birth, in this unnatural form, offers no comfort whatsoever. The body moves before the mind can direct it. Limbs jerk and grasp at nothing. Muscles contract without purpose. Breath comes in ragged gasps that serve no rhythm. Every nerve-ending fire signals the brain has no experience interpreting. Is this cold? Is this pressure? Is this the surface beneath or the air above? The creature cannot yet distinguish between his own boundaries and the world's, cannot tell where he ends and everything else begins. Sensation overwhelms like floodwaters pouring through doors never designed to hold them back. Victor's face becomes the first fixed point in this chaos of perception. The creature's newly functioning eyes find their maker and hold there, searching for something to anchor the spinning confusion. What passes between them in that extended gaze defies simple description. The creature reaches toward the only stable thing in his fragmenting awareness, reaching perhaps for comfort, perhaps for explanation, perhaps simply for contact with another living presence. His maker's response will shape everything that follows. Revulsion crosses Victor's features before he can disguise it. The hand reaching toward him prompts not compassion but retreat, not welcome but rejection. The creature's first lesson about the world arrives in this moment. The face that made you can still find you monstrous. Whatever Victor imagined during those years of preparation, whatever triumphant scene he pictured when dreaming of success, the reality before him produces only the desperate need to escape what he created. He backs away, turns, flees the tower that moments ago represented his greatest achievement. Being born is not automatically a blessing. The creature learns this truth before he learns words, before he can articulate the wrongness of his situation, before he understands that other beings entered existence through gentler doors. Abandonment becomes his first complete experience, the template against which all future experiences will be measured. Victor's retreating footsteps echo through the tower, growing fainter, leaving behind a consciousness that did not ask to exist, and now must exist without guidance, without protection, without even basic acknowledgement of its reality. The first moments of any life carry disproportionate weight, establishing patterns that years of subsequent experience struggle to revise. For the creature, those moments contain nothing but confusion, meeting rejection, need meeting disgust, the most vulnerable instant possible meeting absolute abandonment. Whatever he becomes afterward, whatever violence or tenderness he later demonstrates, these origins cannot be erased. They become the foundation upon which everything else must somehow be built. The creature ventures beyond the tower and discovers that Victor's revulsion was not unique but universal. Every face that turns toward him registers the same sequence: confusion becoming recognition, recognition becoming fear, fear becoming violence or flight. He does not yet understand why this happens, cannot comprehend that his appearance alone condemns him before any action, any word, any demonstration of intent. The verdict arrives before the trial, delivered by strangers who know nothing about him except what their eyes report. Appearance becomes a kind of prison with no possibility of parole. The creature might possess gentleness, curiosity, even wisdom, but none of these qualities can reach the world through a form the world refuses to examine closely. People see the scars, the unnatural proportions, the wrongness that Victor's assembly produced, and they stop seeing anything else. Their fear makes sense to them, feels justified, requires no examination. What looks dangerous must be dangerous, and what looks monstrous must be a monster. The logic is circular, self-confirming, and absolutely impenetrable. Cruelty often begins as fear, and fear loves finding excuses for itself. The villagers who chase the creature with torches do not consider themselves cruel. They believe themselves protective, reasonable, responding appropriately to an obvious threat. Their violence feels defensive even when it initiates contact, even when the creature has harmed no one, even when he flees rather than fights. Fear transforms aggression into self-defense, transforms hatred into prudence, transforms mob behavior into community protection. The excuses write themselves, requiring no conscious deception. Each scream teaches a lesson the creature never asked to learn. Humanity, he begins to understand, extends its compassion selectively, offering warmth to those who meet certain visual criteria while withholding it from those who do not. The kindness humans show each other operates within boundaries that exclude him absolutely. He watches from hiding as families embrace, as friends laugh together, as strangers offer small courtesies that will never be offered to him. The warmth exists, but it exists behind glass he cannot break. Loneliness begins as sorrow, but hardens into something else when compassion never arrives. The creature does not start angry. He starts confused, then hurt, then desperate for any positive contact. Only after enough rejection, enough violence, enough confirmation that the world offers him nothing but hostility, does the softness calcify into rage. This transformation takes time, and the film allows us to witness its stages, to understand that the anger was not inevitable, but cultivated by relentless cruelty. A different response from the world might have produced a different being entirely. The world creates its monsters through reflexive rejection, then points to their monstrousness as justification for the rejection that created it. The creature becomes what he was always assumed to be, but the becoming required countless hands pushing him in that direction. Responsibility distributes itself across every face that screamed, every hand that threw stones, every door that slammed before he could speak a single word. Despite everything, the creature does not surrender to despair. Something in him refuses to accept that existence must remain pure suffering, that understanding will forever be denied, that the warmth he observes between others can never extend to include him. From the edges of society, from hiding places that offer glimpses of ordinary life, he begins the slow work of educating himself. Language becomes his first quarry, hunted with a patience that his violent circumstances might have destroyed but somehow did not. Words arrive one at a time, gathered like precious objects from overheard conversations. The creature listens from barn lofts and forest edges, from beneath windows and behind walls, absorbing sounds and slowly connecting them to meanings. A mother calls a child to dinner, and he learns come and eat in the name the child carries. Farmers discuss weather, and he learns rain and sun and the verbs that describe hope and worry. Each new word costs effort that no one witnesses, study that no teacher guides, progress that earns no praise. He teaches himself because no one else will. Education becomes a form of dignity when all other forms are denied. The creature cannot change his face, cannot alter the scars that make strangers flee, cannot reconstruct himself into something the world might welcome. But he can understand that world, can comprehend its workings, can develop a mind sophisticated enough to analyze his own exclusion. Knowledge offers power of a particular kind, not the power to force acceptance, but the power to recognize that rejection reflects the rejectors more than the rejected. This recognition does not erase pain, but it provides a frame to hold it. The process carries its own cruelty, however. Each new word creates capacity for new suffering. Before language, the creature experienced rejection as raw sensation, terrible but somewhat formless. With words come concepts, and with concepts come the ability to name what is missing. He learns friend and understands he has none. He learns family and recognizes his absolute solitude. He learns love and grasps exactly what the world refuses to offer him. Vocabulary illuminates the darkness of his situation with painful precision. Does intelligence deepen suffering when love remains unavailable? The question haunts the creature's development, though he could not articulate it in these terms. Ignorance might have been kinder, might have left him an animal responding to immediate circumstances without comprehension of their larger meaning. Instead, he becomes something far more tragic, a being fully capable of understanding happiness, yet permanently barred from experiencing it. His mind grows sophisticated enough to analyze exactly how thoroughly he has been excluded. Still, he continues learning. Perhaps hope is simply the refusal to stop reaching, even when every previous reach has been slapped away. The creature reads when he finds abandoned books, listens when human voices carry through walls, practices speech alone in forests where no one can hear his errors. Understanding grows, and with it, the desperate desire to find someone willing to recognize what that understanding means. The cottage sits apart from the village, home to an old man whose eyes no longer function, but whose other senses have sharpened to compensate. The creature discovers this dwelling during his wanderings and observes it for days before approaching, learning its rhythms, understanding that here lives someone different from the others who have rejected him. The blind man cannot see the scars, cannot register the wrongness of proportion, cannot deliver the instant verdict that sighted people pronounce without hesitation. For the first time, the creature considers that he might be met as something other than a monster. The approach happens carefully, with the creature announcing himself through sound rather than simply appearing. The old man startles, but does not flee, cannot flee with the certainty that sighted people possess. Instead, he asks questions, listens to answers, forms impressions based on voice and word choice and the quality of presence in the room. What he perceives is loneliness, intelligence, desperate hunger for connection. These qualities have no visual form, carry no physical markers that would trigger rejection. The blind man invites the stranger to sit, to warm himself, to share a simple meal. Food changes hands between them, and with it something far more nourishing than bread. The creature experiences respect for the first time, the simple acknowledgement of his existence as something other than threat or error. The old man speaks to him as one person speaks to another, asking about his travels, his circumstances, his thoughts. These ordinary courtesies land with extraordinary force upon someone who has never received them before. Conversation becomes communion, the exchange of words, becoming the exchange of recognition that the creature has sought since his first confused moments of consciousness. Real seeing, the film suggests, begins when judgment pauses long enough for understanding to enter. The old man cannot see in the conventional sense, yet he perceives more truly than any sighted person has managed. He perceives a being in pain, seeking shelter, capable of gratitude and gentleness. These perceptions require no eyes, only willingness to encounter another consciousness without predetermined conclusions. Blindness becomes a gift in this context, a removal of the very capacity that has caused the creature such unrelenting suffering. The cottage transforms into sanctuary, however temporary it might prove. Within these walls, the creature exists as person rather than monster, guest rather than intruder, companion rather than threat. The old man's kindness asks nothing in return except basic decency, which the creature provides abundantly. Stories pass between them, small confidences, the ordinary intimacies that friendship naturally produces. For these brief hours, the creature glimpses what life might have been, what life could perhaps still become, if only the rest of the world possessed this old man's particular vision. Kindness, it turns out, requires nothing more than the refusal to flee before understanding arrives. The old man demonstrates this truth without preaching it, simply by treating his strange visitor as a visitor rather than a violation. What seems remarkable is actually simple, requiring only the suspension of fear, long enough for recognition to occur. The cottage could not remain hidden from the world forever. Others arrive, sighted people who react with the familiar terror the creature has learned to expect. Screams shatter the peace that the old man's blindness made possible, and suddenly the sanctuary dissolves into chaos. The creature finds himself once again facing raised weapons, contorted faces, the unanimous verdict of rejection delivered without appeal. The old man's protests cannot override what the others see, cannot convince them that the monster at his table poses no threat. Fear speaks louder than testimony. The intrusion destroys more than a single afternoon of peace. It destroys the hope that peace represented, the possibility that somewhere in the world acceptance might be found. The creature had allowed himself to believe, during those hours of conversation and shared bread, that his situation might not be permanent. The old man proved that connection was possible, that his appearance did not automatically prohibit warmth. But the old man's household cannot protect him from the old man's neighbors, and the neighbors see only what the creature's scarred form advertises. One betrayal echoes louder than 100 small cruelties. The accumulated rejections before this moment hurt, certainly, but they came from strangers who never offered anything to withdraw. The cottage represented something given and then taken away, hope raised and then crushed, a door opened and then slammed with particular violence. The creature had tasted belonging, however briefly, and now that taste makes all subsequent exclusion more bitter. Knowing what warmth feels like makes the cold afterward harder to endure. Grief returns wearing heavier clothes than before. The creature retreats into wilderness, into isolation chosen rather than imposed, but the choosing provides no comfort. His mind replays the cottage scenes endlessly, the conversation, the shared meal, the old man's face turning toward him with something other than horror. These memories become a form of torture, evidence of what remains forever out of reach. The sanctuary failed not because it was false, but because it was real, and its reality makes the failure more complete. What does it cost to lose a home barely discovered? The creature pays this price in whatever currency his strange existence provides. Withdrawing further from humanity, trusting less, hoping less, allowing the hardness that rejection cultivates to spread deeper into his being. The old man gave him a gift that the world immediately stole, and the theft damages something that previous rejections left intact. Before the cottage, the creature sought acceptance because he believed it possible. Afterward, he begins to wonder whether seeking itself is the error. The heart opens with difficulty after enough wounding. The creature's heart opened in that cottage, responded to simple kindness with simple gratitude, permitted itself vulnerability in the presence of someone who seemed safe. The violation that followed teaches a lesson about vulnerability itself, about the danger of permitting hope when hope has been so consistently punished. Something closes that may never fully open again. The creature seeks out his maker, across distances that would exhaust ordinary travelers. Through terrain that offers no welcome, he tracks Victor Frankenstein with a determination born from having nowhere else to direct his need. Questions drive him forward, questions that only one person can answer. Why was I made? Why was I abandoned? What do you owe me for bringing me into a world that refuses to accept my existence? The confrontation, when it finally arrives, occurs on a night already charged with other significances. William and Elizabeth are celebrating their wedding, joy filling the Frankenstein household while its eldest son remains consumed by darker matters. The demand emerges from accumulated desperation. The creature does not ask politely, does not frame his request as suggestion or preference. He requires a companion, another being like himself, someone who might share the particular loneliness that his unique existence guarantees. One creature in all the world made as he was made, capable of understanding what no naturally born person could comprehend. This is what he wants, what he insists upon, what he presents to Victor as the only possible compensation for the life Victor forced upon him without consent. Unmet needs transform into ultimatums when despair exhausts gentler options. The creature tried patience, tried education, tried approaching humanity with openness and hope. Each attempt ended in rejection, in violence, in confirmation that the world holds no place for him. Victor represents the only remaining possibility, the sole being with the knowledge and capability to create what the creature requires. The request is not reasonable in any conventional sense, but reason abandoned this situation long before the creature formulated his demand. Victor refuses. The word abomination crosses his lips. The same revulsion that appeared in his face during those first moments in the tower, now hardened into principle. He will not create another monster, will not multiply his original error, will not provide his rejected creation with the companionship that might make continued existence bearable. The refusal carries no acknowledgement of responsibility, no recognition that Victor's choices produced the suffering now standing before him. Disgust replaces obligation, moral certainty replaces moral complexity. Two lonelinesses collide in that moment, one privileged and one condemned. Victor possesses family, reputation, the possibility of redemption through future accomplishments. The creature possesses nothing except his own unwanted consciousness and the memories of rejection that consciousness contains. Their positions could not be more different, yet both suffer isolation of a kind. Victor chose his, retreating into obsession, neglecting relationships that might have sustained him. The creature's isolation was imposed, every door closed before he could knock. The asymmetry makes Victor's refusal harder to witness, his disgust harder to justify. The confrontation ends without resolution. Victor has given his answer, and the creature has received it. What follows from this impasse will unfold through actions rather than words, through consequences that neither fully anticipates. The wedding celebration continues elsewhere in the house, unaware of what transpires in these shadowed rooms. Violence compresses time into moments that expand forever afterward. Victor reaches for a weapon, aims at the creature with hands steadied by years of resentment and fear, prepares to end what he started in that lightning-struck tower. The decision to shoot arrives faster than thought, faster than the careful deliberation that might have recognized other possibilities. A trigger moves, a mechanism responds, and something irreversible enters the world. Elizabeth steps between them. Her movement emerges from instinct rather than calculation, from a compassion so deeply rooted that it operates without consultation. She sees the creature not as monster but as suffering being, recognizes in his eyes something that Victor's hatred has made invisible to him. Her body becomes intervention, becomes the physical expression of mercy that words could not adequately convey. The bullet meant for the creature finds her instead, and the room transforms into something none of its occupants will ever escape. The shot cannot be retrieved. Liet has entered flesh that loved, that hoped, that carried the possibility of futures now permanently foreclosed. Victor's aim was true in one sense, accurate to his intention, yet the outcome betrays everything that intention meant to accomplish. He sought to destroy the monster and instead destroyed the warmth, the moral center, the steady flame that might have guided him back toward humanity. Elizabeth falls, and with her falls every remaining chance for Victor's redemption through love rather than through violence. William reaches his bride as she collapses, holds her while understanding floods his features. His brother's hand holds the weapon. His brother's choice produced this wound. His brother's obsession has finally extracted its ultimate price. Dying words pass between the brothers, William naming what the situation reveals with a clarity that only endings permit. Victor is the true monster here, the one who brought destruction to everyone he should have protected, the one whose creation was merely the instrument of a damage that originated years before in ambition untethered from wisdom. Guilt finds a face in that moment, and the face belongs to Victor himself. The creature stands witness to what his existence has caused, yet his hands remain clean of this particular blood. The violence he provoked arrived through Victor's choices, Victor's weapon, Victor's inability to see any solution except destruction. The complexity defies simple assignment of blame, yet the bullet's origin cannot be disputed. Victor pulled the trigger, and Elizabeth received what he intended for another. Courage met panic in that compressed instant, and panic proved more lethal. Elizabeth's bravery earned her a wound that her beloved could not prevent, delivered by his brother in pursuit of a target that her compassion refused to condemn. 3 people stood in that room making choices, and the choices intersected in the worst possible configuration. Love, fear, and pride occupied the same space for one terrible moment, and the moment produced only loss. The creature lifts Elizabeth from the floor where she fell. His massive arms, built for purposes Victor never fully considered, now cradle the dying woman with gentleness that contradicts everything his appearance suggests. He carries her away from the house, away from the brothers whose conflict produced her wound, away from the world that taught him only rejection. In these final moments, the one called monster becomes the only source of comfort available to the one who showed him compassion. Elizabeth's breathing grows shallow as they move through darkness. She does not struggle, does not scream, does not treat her carrier as threat, despite everything that logic might dictate. Perhaps she recognizes something in him that others refuse to see, some capacity for tenderness that survived all the cruelty meant to extinguish it. Or perhaps she simply lacks the strength for fear, her remaining energy devoted entirely to the labor of dying. Either way, her stillness grants the creature something he has rarely experienced: trust, however circumstantial its origins. Tenderness survives inside rage, and this survival makes every moral calculation more difficult. The creature has reasons for anger that most people would consider sufficient justification for violence. His existence began in abandonment, continued through persecution, and brought him finally to a confrontation that cost an innocent woman her life. Yet here, carrying that woman through the night, he demonstrates the gentleness that might have characterized his entire existence if the world had offered different lessons. The monster comforts the dying, while the man who created him remains behind, weapon still warm in his trembling hand. Elizabeth's final breaths find her held rather than alone. The creature speaks to her, words learned through painful self-education now employed for the softest possible purpose. What passes between them belongs to them alone, private in a way that their circumstances made almost impossible. She dies in arms that the world called monstrous, attended by a being that humanity unanimously rejected. The irony cuts deep for anyone willing to notice it. Mercy arrived from the direction no one expected, wearing a face that everyone feared. Victor loses the last person capable of anchoring him to ordinary goodness. Elizabeth represented possibility, a connection to warmth and moral clarity that his obsessions continuously eroded, but never entirely severed. With her death, that tether breaks completely. Nothing remains to pull him back from the darkness his choices created. No voice gentle enough to penetrate the walls he built around his guilt. The creature took nothing from Victor that Victor had not already abandoned through neglect, but the taking nonetheless leaves Victor emptier than he has ever been. The tragedy reaches completion in this carrying away, this final comfort, this demonstration that the one denied humanity possessed more of it than those who claimed the title. What remains now is aftermath, the long unwinding of consequences that cannot be reversed. Victor returns to the tower. The circular room that held his greatest triumph now represents everything he wishes to unmake. Every ambition that cost more than he could afford, every boundary crossed without sufficient consideration of what lay beyond. He moves through the space like a man attending his own funeral, touching equipment that once felt like extensions of his will, reviewing notebooks filled with handwriting that seems to belong to someone else entirely. The person who wrote those careful observations no longer exists, replaced by someone who understands what that careful work actually produced. Flames begin at the edges and work inward. Victor feeds the fire deliberately, offering his research to destruction with a ritualistic attention that mirrors the attention he once gave to creation. Pages curl and blacken, formulas disappearing into smoke, years of accumulated knowledge returning to the nothing from which thought originally emerges. Glass shatters in the heat, copper warps and melts, the sophisticated apparatus that channeled lightning into flesh now surrendering to a more common form of energy. The tower becomes a pyre for everything Victor believed about himself. Destruction feels like punishment and also like relief. These two sensations coexist without contradiction. The same flames that hurt also cleansing, the same loss that grieves also liberating. Victor watches his life's work disappear and finds within that watching something almost resembling peace. The knowledge he gathered cannot hurt anyone else now, cannot be replicated by followers or stolen by rivals, cannot produce additional creatures condemned to the suffering his creation endured. The fire closes possibilities that should never have been opened. What knowledge should die with those who discover it? The question burns alongside the notebooks, unanswered but finally acknowledged. Victor spent years assuming that discovery automatically justified itself, that capability implied permission, that the expansion of human knowledge served goods too obvious to require examination. The fire represents a different conclusion, reached too late to prevent disaster, but perhaps not too late to prevent repetition. Some doors should remain closed regardless of our ability to open them. The story pivots here from making life to surviving consequences. Victor can no longer pretend that his creation exists separately from himself, that the creature's suffering belongs to the creature alone, that the deaths following from his original transgression represent someone else's responsibility. The flames that consume his laboratory also consume his excuses, leaving behind only the raw fact of what he did and what it cost. Creation gave way to destruction, ambition gave way to regret, and the man who sought to conquer death now watches his conquest burn. Morning will find the tower a skeleton of stone and ash, emptied of everything that made it dangerous. Victor will still carry the knowledge in his mind, but the physical infrastructure of his transgression will exist no longer. Whether this matters, whether destruction of tools atones for misuse of tools, remains an open question the fire cannot answer. Victor pursues the creature across years that blur together into a single, sustained obsession. Through forests and across mountains, through villages that want nothing to do with either hunter or hunted, the chase extends beyond any reasonable duration. What began as rage hardens into something closer to purpose, the pursuit becoming its own justification regardless of what might happen if it ever succeeds. Victor no longer lives except in relation to this hunt, no longer exists except as the one who follows. Revenge is grief wearing a mask, staying awake past any healthy bedtime. Victor cannot mourn Elizabeth properly because mourning would require stillness, would demand sitting with loss rather than running from it. The chase provides constant motion, constant distraction, constant focus on an external target, rather than the internal devastation that waits whenever movement stops. He tells himself he seeks justice, or protection for others, or closure for the dead. The truth is simpler and sadder. He cannot bear to stop because stopping would mean feeling what he has spent years outrunning. The creature flees and leads simultaneously, running from hatred while also pulling his pursuer further from any possibility of ordinary life. Perhaps he recognizes what Victor cannot admit, that this chase binds them together more intimately than creation itself ever did. Two beings who cannot exist without reference to each other, whose identities have become defined by their mutual opposition. Victor made the creature, but the creature now makes Victor in return, shaping his days and directions, determining his geography and his goals. What if chasing someone becomes merely another way of chasing yourself? Victor hunts the physical form that embodies his greatest mistake, but that form carries meaning that transcends its flesh. The creature represents everything Victor cannot accept about himself. The ambition that ignored consequence, the pride that dismissed caution, the choices that cost others their lives. Destroying the creature might feel like destroying the evidence, erasing the proof of what Victor's brilliance actually produced. The hunt is partly murder and partly suicide, an attempt to annihilate what cannot be separated from the annihilator. Years pass with nothing changing except the landscape and the season. Victor grows older, grows thinner, grows more detached from anything resembling normal human concern. The creature remains always ahead, always visible enough to follow, but never close enough to catch. Both become prisoners of that first moment in the tower, bound by lightning and blood and the terrible bond between maker and maid. Neither can imagine an alternative now. So long as the pursuit continued, so completely has it replaced whatever other possibilities their lives once contained. The chase that was meant to end something instead becomes the thing itself. The prison and the prisoner indistinguishable, the punishment and the crime, merged into a single ongoing sentence that neither can commute. The Arctic becomes the final arena. Victor has chased the creature to the very edge of the world, to ice fields that stretch toward horizons indifferent to human drama. Here, where civilization cannot reach and survival itself becomes uncertain, he prepares his ultimate attempt at destruction. Dynamite, carried across impossible distances, represents his last gamble. If explosives cannot end what lightning began, then nothing Victor possesses can accomplish the task. The frozen landscape witnesses this final confrontation between creator and created, between the man who wanted too much and the being who received too little. The detonation fails to achieve its purpose. Ice shatters, sound echoes across emptiness, smoke rises and dissipates into cold air, but the creature survives what Victor intended as annihilation. The explosion instead damages Victor himself, leaves him wounded and stranded on ice that offers no shelter, no warmth, no path toward safety. His grand plan collapses into injury and exhaustion, years of pursuit, ending not in triumph, but in helplessness. The hunter becomes the one requiring rescue. The destroyer becomes the one requiring preservation. Control collapses fastest at the world's coldest edges. Victor planned everything except his own frailty, calculated everything except the possibility that his body might fail before his enemy did. The Arctic does not care about his grievances or his justifications, does not recognize the righteousness he assigned to his cause. It offers only cold, only distance, only the absolute indifference of a landscape that existed long before human beings invented purposes to pursue across its surface. Against this indifference, Victor's obsession shrinks to its actual proportions. Small, temporary, ultimately forgettable. Captain Anderson's ship appears through fog like an answer to a question Victor never thought to ask. The crew pulls him from the ice, tends his wounds, provides warmth and food, and the simple animal requirements for continued breathing. These strangers owe him nothing, know nothing of his history, yet they preserve his life with the matter-of-fact competence of people accustomed to rescuing those whom the Arctic nearly claimed. Victor joins the ranks of the saved despite having caused so much loss, receiving mercy he never extended to the being he made. What does it mean to accept help after causing such harm? Victor lies in the ship's hold, wrapped in borrowed blankets, alive because others chose to value his survival regardless of whether he deserved it. The rescue mocks his entire project in a sense, demonstrating that dependence on strangers might be more reliable than mastery over nature. He sought to conquer death and ended up relying on the kindness of passing sailors. The grand ambition concludes in the simplest possible vulnerability, a wounded man accepting what he cannot provide for himself. The story returns to where it began, ice and silence. A ship going nowhere quickly, a confession waiting to be spoken. Anderson listens. This is his primary contribution to a story that does not belong to him, his willingness to receive what Victor needs to speak. The captain sits with his rescued guest through hours of confession, hearing details that strain belief, accepting testimony that would seem like fever dreams if delivered with less obvious anguish. Victor tells everything, holding nothing back, and Anderson becomes the vessel into which years of guilt finally pour. The ship remains trapped in ice, but something within Victor begins to move. The tale takes shape across multiple conversations, interrupted by sleep and meals and the ordinary demands of shipboard existence. Victor describes his childhood, his education, his ambition, his creation, his abandonment, his loss. Each element connects to the next with terrible logic, each choice leading inevitably toward its consequence. Anderson asks questions when clarification serves understanding, remains silent when silence serves better. He does not judge, at least not aloud, offering instead the simple gift of attention that judgment would foreclose. Then the creature arrives. Having followed Victor to this frozen edge, he too seeks something from the ship, though his needs differ from his makers. Anderson meets him with fear that gradually transforms into something more complicated, hearing now a second account of the same events, a perspective that complicates what seemed clear only hours before. The creature speaks with the vocabulary he taught himself, the eloquence born from lonely study, and his version of the story casts different shadows than Victor's did. Truth becomes clearer when allowed to contradict itself. Anderson hears Victor describe a monster. He hears the creature describe a father who fled. He hears Victor speak of relentless persecution. He hears the creature speak of relentless rejection. The accounts overlap, in fact, while diverging in meaning, each narrator selecting details that support his understanding of what happened and why. Neither lies exactly, yet neither tells the whole truth either. The captain becomes the first person to hold both versions simultaneously, weighing them against each other without demanding resolution. The ship transforms into a floating courtroom without a judge, only witnesses testifying to their own experience. No verdict arrives because no verdict is possible, not when both plaintiff and defendant carry legitimate grievances, not when responsibility distributes itself across too many choices to assign cleanly. Anderson's role is not to decide, but to hear, not to punish, but to understand. He performs this role with a patience the Arctic perhaps taught him, the patience of someone accustomed to waiting for conditions beyond his control. Sympathy shifts when stories receive equal hearing. The obvious monster becomes less obvious, the obvious victim becomes less innocent, and the simple narrative collapses into something demanding more careful attention. Anderson discovers what anyone discovers who listens long enough, that understanding requires holding complexity rather than resolving it prematurely. Victor's body fails before his words run out. The injuries from the explosion, the years of deprivation, the accumulated cost of obsession extracted beyond what any constitution could indefinitely sustain. These debts come due simultaneously in the ship's cramped quarters. Anderson watches his guest decline, recognizes the trajectory, understands that rescue arrived too late to preserve life, and only soon enough to preserve the story. Victor lies in borrowed blankets, breathing shallowly, approaching an end that his entire existence seemed to be rushing toward. The creature comes to him, through corridors narrow enough that his large frame must turn sideways, past crew members who press themselves against walls to avoid contact. He makes his way to where his maker lies dying. The two regard each other across a distance that cannot be measured in inches, a gap created by creation and abandonment and years of mutual pursuit. And whatever words remain between them must be spoken now or never spoken at all. Victor apologizes. The word seems inadequate to the scale of the transgression, a single syllable attempting to address years of suffering, yet inadequacy does not prevent it from being spoken. He acknowledges what he did, what he failed to do, what his choices cost the being whose existence he forced into being. No justifications accompany the acknowledgement, no explanations designed to minimize or distribute responsibility. Just the admission, offered finally, that he was wrong. The creature forgives. This too seems inadequate, seems almost impossible given everything that preceded it, yet forgiveness arrives nonetheless. Not approval, not agreement that the suffering was acceptable, not erasure of the wounds that the suffering carved. Something else, something more difficult to name. A release of the need for revenge, a setting down of the burden that vengeance requires its carriers to bear. The creature forgives because holding on to hatred has become heavier than letting it go, because the alternative is to remain forever defined by what was done to him. Can peace exist without justice, or does peace sometimes become its own form of justice? Victor dies having finally acknowledged what he owed. The creature survives having finally received that acknowledgement. Neither outcome repairs the damage, neither restores Elizabeth or William, or the years of isolation and persecution. The wound remains a wound, visible forever in the creature's scars and in the emptiness Victor leaves behind. Forgiveness does not erase, it simply stops adding new injury to old. The chase ends not with victory but with stopping. Both pursuer and pursued arrive at the same frozen point and discover that arrival offers no triumph, only exhaustion and the possibility of something other than continued combat. Victor's eyes close for the final time, and the creature remains beside him, keeping vigil over the one who made him and abandoned him and at the very last asked his pardon. The ice that held the ship begins to shift. Currents beneath the frozen surface respond to forces beyond human perception, and what seemed permanent reveals itself as temporary after all. Anderson feels the change before he sees it, the subtle motion returning to a vessel that had forgotten what movement felt like. Cracks spread across the white expanse that imprisoned them, channels opening where solid barriers stood for so long. The Arctic, having held its captives through confession and confrontation and death, now prepares to release them. The creature positions himself at the ship's bow. His massive frame, built for purposes his maker never fully imagined, now serves a different function entirely. He pushes against the ice, breaks what remains of the barrier, clears a path toward open water with strength that the crew could not have summoned collectively. The being who frightened them days ago now works for their liberation, converting the power that society saw only as threat into something that preserves rather than destroys. Anderson watches and revises every assumption he carried about what monsters do. The captain makes a decision. He will not continue toward whatever destination originally justified this voyage, will not pursue the ambitions that brought him to this frozen edge. Instead, he turns the ship homeward, abandoning whatever reckless goal mirrored Victor's own recklessness. The story he witnessed has taught him something about the cost of pushing beyond reasonable limits, about the wreckage that obsession leaves in its wake. Anderson chooses ordinary life over extraordinary achievement, warmth over glory, return over conquest. The choice represents its own kind of wisdom, earned through proximity to someone who chose differently. The creature remains on the ice as the ship pulls away. He does not board, does not seek passage to lands that would only reject him again, does not attempt to join a humanity that demonstrated so thoroughly its unwillingness to include him. Instead, he turns toward the horizon where sunlight breaks through clouds that have covered this landscape throughout the story. His arms rise, not in threat but in reception, reaching toward light that asks nothing of him, that falls equally on the beautiful and the scarred, that offers warmth without conditions. What remains after everything? A ship moving toward home, carrying a story that will be told and retold. A frozen landscape returning to its ancient silence. A being standing alone in the cold, face lifted toward the sun, choosing to receive what the world offers rather than rage against what it withholds. The choice surprises because nothing in the creature's experience suggested it was available. Yet here it stands, demonstrated in the simplest possible gesture, arms open, face upward, accepting light. The film leaves one soft question lingering in the air it created. Tomorrow will arrive, as it always does, carrying its own possibilities and its own demands. What will you choose when it comes?